Hey, here we go. This is episode 49 of the Get Out and Surf podcast, coming to you from Tamarindo, Costa Rica. I'm Joe Walsh. I'm sitting here with Nikki Huron. Hello, Nikki.
Good morning, and another beautiful day here in Tamarindo, Costa Rica.
We're finally doing an early podcast where the brewery's closed and there was no one on the roads, and we're just looking at all the equipment out here. Lights are off. It's kind of nice.
Someone will start cutting something, or something will happen. I'm sure it will, but hopefully not.
That's Tamarindo for you.
Yep.
Patrick McNulty.
What's up?
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, man.
I think I was here the last show.
Yeah, you've been here for a good run because we missed you for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. How you doing, man? You went to San Jose this week.
Yeah, I went there and did a little decompress.
Yeah.
Just sat in a hotel room, had room service, and watched TV and took naps.
For 2 nights.
Yeah.
That's a staycation. I mean, you go somewhere, just check into a room and just...
I remember you used to do that in the old days.
Oh, I still enjoy a nice air-conditioned hotel room, watch the HBO all day, get the Pizza Hut with the cheese in the crust. You don't have that in Tamarindo.
I almost made it to Denny's this time. I didn't, it was too far away. I always go to Denny's when I go to San Jose.
Yeah. No, I don't even go to San Jose. I don't go anywhere. I barely drive. Just drive my scooter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a very, very interesting guest this week. Very excited to have you on the show. Mitch McNeil, welcome to Get Out and Surf.
Hello, Get Out and Surf.
How do I salute you? I mean, you're like the man in charge of Surfrider, the Chicago chapter. I think you're called the chair. Or
yeah, it's a chair title.
Okay, but it's a very impressive title to be a chair of a Surfrider chapter in the first place.
I'm really impressed.
Yeah, well, I'm impressed too. We have a common friend, Larry the Cheese. The Get Out and Surf podcast went up to Muskegon for the Great Lakes Surf Festival. We were all there. He was talking about you then. Said you're doing some pretty rad stuff. And then I saw this photo of Gary, Indiana with the killer wave and then some factories in the back. And I was reminded that was actually your home break. Is that correct?
Yeah, I live in the Chicago area.
Okay.
So for us, we were always looking toward what we call the bottom of the lake, the southern tip that receives the biggest north swell.
Yeah, and the best winds from north to south.
Yeah, I mean, basically on the Great Lakes, everything is kind of a westerly. Everything's moving from west to east.
Uh-huh.
So...
oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was also like north to south, like storms coming out of the north.
There are northerlies,
Okay.
and then rarely there are kind of easterly oriented systems.
But generally it's from the west to the east.
Yeah, everything's like the upper altitude jet streams have a sort of west to east movement, generally speaking. So things tend to hit one side and move to the other side. But we do get the big north blow, and then south.
So you're
southwest.
like the very southern end of Lake Michigan.
Yeah.
Basically. Okay.
Do those different winds bring in obviously different temperatures? And
recently we've had this thing called the polar vortex in the kind of the winter period, and that's just this massive thing coming down from the North Pole that always brings big north wind and some sort of scary precipitation, and everyone huddles in their little caverns.
Except for the surfers that are putting on their 6.5s or their 5.4s.
Right, the surfers get very excited.
Have there actually been some decent waves? I'm sure there has. It's like in Chicago proper, like right there by like Navy Pier or by the aquarium.
Yes, it's rare.
Okay.
Yeah, Chicago is not really a surfing destination, but there are times when you want to go out. Maybe you don't want to drive an extra half hour to Indiana.
Yeah.
And you accept something kind of less imposing at one of the city beaches.
Every once in a while, maybe it totally turns on, though, too, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
I could show you some pictures.
Yeah, that's cool. So that kind of brings us to how you and I connected, and that was over the fact that you're the chair of the Chicago Surfrider chapter, and you're involved in a lawsuit against U.S. Steel, one of the factories of many, right, that have lined the shores of Lake Michigan for like over 100 years.
Yeah.
And I was doing just a little bit of looking online at what the Clean Water Act really is. And before 1948, I couldn't see that there was any sort of laws anywhere to protect the watershed, and there was no like federal regulations on water pollution. Can that be true?
Yes.
Well, '72 is regarded as sort of the watershed moment where we had a massive law in place to suddenly protect the water.
Yeah.
It was pretty much the Wild West before that.
And that's pretty much that's what's called the Clean Water Act. Was
Right.
the amendment
Clean
in
water
1972.
and air.
Okay.
Under Nixon, by the way.
Great. There you go.
Yeah, Nixon did some good things and he did some bad things, like all of them. But that was one of the good things.
Yeah, he did.
You're right. We've got 20% of the fresh water on the planet is in the Great Lakes. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay, so 1/5 of the entire fresh water on the planet is at risk. This lawsuit that Surfrider's involved with U.S. Steel, what are they doing, and how can we, and what are you trying to stop? Where are we at now?
We're trying to help them reform their practice in ways that will keep most of the poison out of the water, and they can do it. They just don't have the will.
So
and they don't have. There's no cop on the beat right now.
Sure. So
everything's backed off.
So they're processing. They have a byproduct or a discharge, some kind of liquid, got some chemical content, and they should be treating it in a treatment plant or their own filtration system. But instead, it's cheaper, easier to just discharge it in the river. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, that's a nice generalization, I think.
Okay.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about it? Why don't you where are you at? How did you start?
So I got connected with the surf community when I moved to Chicago, and then I joined Surfrider because we had an issue that was a catalyst for our chapter, which was surfers being thrown in jail by the police for surfing.
Why would they do that?
Well, Chicago, very over-regulated city, has a flotation device ban.
A what?
Think about that.
A flotation device ban. So so actually on the beaches, if you were a lifeguard, you wouldn't be able to go in water with a torpedo and save someone?
Well, lifeguards are exempted.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
They don't want anybody even swimming?
Anybody that's wearing a life jacket that fell overboard is exempted too.
Yeah. So there was an event that transpired that was the catalyst for this regulation. And in Chicago, because we have generally westerly winds, they're offshore, and they push unsuspecting flotation devices and whoever might be riding on them away from shore, and then problems occur if these people can't swim. So there was something that happened, and it was, a tragic event.
Someone got blown away.
And the city overreacted and just enacted a
Oh, wow.
a blanket coverage on the
Oh, okay.
flotation devices, which includes surfboards.
Was it a surfer or was it like a paddleboarder?
No, this is someone on a flotation raft.
like a pool bed, like
Couple of
inflatable
kids
pool.
on a
Back
raft.
when that happened, Joe, they didn't have.
Paddleboards.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably happened a long time
Yeah.
ago.
It
Wow.
was probably a piece of wood that a little kid jumped on to have a good time and went out to sea.
like that.
Oh, that sucks.
So
It does.
our chapter formed around that, where surfers were being,
Persecuted, unable to enjoy surfing. I mean, come on. You're in Chicago. There's waves. You got to go hit that.
What was the punishment? Was it a fine, or was it what was?
temporary detainment.
No
And
way.
and a severe spanking.
Yeah, I mean, a few hours in a cell in a cold wetsuit.
That would really suck.
So he got arrested, and what happened after that?
Nothing really happened. I think once the wheels of justice started spinning, they all realized this is a really bad PR move by the police to be following through with this action. And
Like literally putting surfers in the back of a police car and driving them down to the station?
yeah, there was one specific event in about 2008. Local legend surfer Jack Flynn, Captain Jack, was surfing at a city beach, and this thing happened. What happens is there are residential towers that sit right along the lake
Yeah.
front. So you got these people up there with the binoculars up in 22nd floor, and they see someone in the lake, and it's winter, and they think, oh, they're going to be a citizen hero, and they phone 911. That's where the problems start.
Well, honestly,
Well,
most people probably aren't used to seeing people surfing in the water at all when it's the middle of winter and it's freezing.
And plus, because of the temperatures, out here, if you're in like Tamarindo, if the police are waiting for you on the beach, you just sit there and you won't be cold. You just be sitting there in the water. But there, I imagine you can't sit out on the old lake too long.
So they arrested Captain Jack.
Yeah, and once that happened, the shock waves through the surf community were intense, and there was a chapter over in Michigan that was notified that maybe Chicago needs a chapter. We need to work on this issue of beach access for surfing, which is something that every Surfrider chapter has in their crosshairs, beach access, because there's problems everywhere.
Sure.
So the Michigan chapter of Surfrider reached out to the cadre of surfers in Chicago, and we put together a chapter like overnight. And I was foolish enough to raise my hand and say, yeah, I'll show up.
So did you guys help to put the legislation in that reversed that ban on floating devices?
Yeah, job number one was sitting down with the city and coming to an agreement about surfers and their special privileges on what they call red flag days.
Red flag days.
Yeah,
Which is gale force winds or heavy winds.
that's
or
like everybody
heavy
out of the
surf.
water
Right. And basically now what? You can surf those days?
at your own risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a beach season that runs Memorial Weekend to Labor Day, so that's a separate entity, and then there's the off season, which is everything else, the other 9 months of the year.
And now you're able to surf those 9 months?
Yeah, we have a few more beaches that are open to us during the winter.
Okay.
So that was our first feather in the cap, and the parks people were eager to come to an agreement with us. So that was a very short meeting.
Well, it's good.
Because they were embarrassed by it. They were, there are surfers who work for the Parks District, and they just considered it like a global embarrassment because people are commenting on it everywhere.
Yeah, I could see how that would be.
We had another surfer hassled in 2012, and at that point, Twitter had started firing, and you had Kelly Slater commenting on, surfers being arrested in Chicago. What the hell's going on? So you don't want that kind of attention.
It's amazing how in just the last few years how much surfing's really evolved. Because not even 10 years ago we're talking about this happening, and even now people are they don't realize that there's so much surfing going on in the Great Lakes. But a lot more people. There's events, there's festivals, there's surf clubs, and now it's grown into wave pools, and it's going to the Olympics next year. But that was only 2012, and surfing wasn't allowed in the city of Chicago at all.
Right.
That's crazy.
So the Surfrider Foundation is a needed organization, and it goes back, for me in Rhode Island, back in the 60s. There are certain states that have easements to the water, and then there's private land around it. And a lot of times those easements would get pulled into someone else's property, or they would decide, well, I'm not going to let anyone cross this piece of property. And we actually had people arrested in the late 60s on Narragansett Town Beach because they would close off the beach and charge you to go in, but people would jump over the wall or go around the wall, and they'd have the cops waiting on the beach for you. We didn't have a Surfrider Foundation, and it was years and years after that, but we actually had people in jail the same way as Chicago did. And it was private people that fought. It was private surfers that fought the regulation for the easement to the water, and we were successful. But Surfrider kind of grew out of those old pioneering days.
So beyond the beach access issue, we've been involved as an organization in plastic awareness in all of its forms. In Chicago, we instituted a bag ban, which has evolved into a fee for a bag, which is more effective, kind of retraining consumers at these stores. So that's been pretty successful, but you got to get it sort of all over the state to really make it work.
Yeah,
it's just in a few places.
But the concept's been catching on. I know California, I think it's statewide now. And even here in Tamarindo, like we've cut out our bags. We have only the compostable ones.
We have the compostable bags made out of cornstarch.
Yeah, but just the fact that, the straws, I know that was just kind of a movement that started, with social media and has grown to, like, you go to a lot of restaurants in different parts of the U.S. And they don't give you a straw anymore, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So you've fought the plastics and now you're on your way to the big steel plants.
Yeah, so what happened was, as I said, surfers are my constituent group number one. And I was looking out for them because I am one. And we're surfing the south end of the lake, and the more I get familiar with the scene, I start to hear stories about surfers getting sick. So I meet a fellow surfer, Judith Miller, who is a environmental law professor at University of Chicago. Very fortuitous. She and I agreed that Surfrider and her group of lawyers could do something. So we started to study the south end, just generally, trying to figure out who the players were, where these facilities are, what they put in the water, what they're allowed to put in the water by the EPA. They can put stuff in, not too much, but they're allowed to put stuff in the water.
Chromium?
You name it. I mean, they have their legal discharge limits, which was one of the kind of revelations of this investigation on our part. So I got all the data from an EPA site, and I put together this sort of infographic map that showed you where the facilities are, what they do, what they put in the water, and how often they break the law, and what kind of fines they pay. And it was just a mind-blowing kind of a map to look at, because they're paying like $2,000 a year in fines.
No way.
Which is not even lunch money.
And
it's worth them. It's worth it for them to circumvent the whole system because it costs them nothing.
Yeah, as I call it, the cost of doing business the way they want to.
So we're talking about, like, factories, not just steel, but, like, there's factories manufacturing all kinds of things right on the lakes, right? There's
the big players there are U.S. Steel. Mm-hmm. Then there's another steel plant, ArcelorMittal. They're global. I don't know. I think they're Dutch or something.
Okay.
And then BP, British
Oil.
Petroleum.
Okay.
Those are the big three. And then there's all the industries that service them, also kind of crowding in there. So like I say, Indiana has 60 miles of shoreline on Lake Michigan, 45 miles of which are private land. In other words, fenced off, and, they look like the slag heaps of Mordor.
So like 45 miles along Lake Michigan of industrial manufacturing and legal industrial manufacturing waste up to certain limits allowed by the EPA, and then those limits are being surpassed. Those laws are being broken, and they're being fined basically nothing when you compare it to probably how much revenue these companies bring in.
That's correct.
Wow. And then you're just trying to surf some waves right
right
there.
So I started this campaign to do a little undercover work and find out what was going on. And I had this team put together of surfer activists, me, and these lawyers from University of Chicago, Abrams Environmental Law Clinic. And we had put together quite a bit of information. I made the map. And then suddenly in the middle of all this activity we were involved in, U.S. Steel did this horrible thing. They released hundreds and hundreds of pounds of hexavalent chromium into the lake. And if there was ever a team that was ready to pounce, it was us. You
already had all the data. You had everything all set up.
We had the organization, volunteer-based organization, perfect. We're not professionals, Surfrider. And then this group of lawyers, and it was a dream team. So we got right in there, and we were the first to file a complaint. And like the day after we filed our complaint, the city of Chicago kind of piggybacked on ours. They wanted some of the action.
Oh, that's great.
So they're sucking water out of there for the drinking.
Water.
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so we had an ally, and then all the other organizations in the area sort of lent moral support too. But Yeah, it was a very interesting process for me, who'd never done anything like that.
Yeah, I want to ask, like, and take a quick step back here. Like, what was your background before you got involved with Surfrider?
I'm an artist, graphic designer, web developer,
So that map,
musician.
So that map you made was probably a pretty awesome map.
Yeah, it's an awesome map.
So you got to add killer to that. No,
Industry killer.
killer.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to add that too.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to learn.
Corporate killer.
Like, and I'm trying to gain some insight as to how to spearhead a movement, how to become more of an activist. I mean, as we go into the new year, and I just think about, what can I do that's going to be good? And I want to hear these stories because you had no experience in activism. You're a graphic designer that had a passion for the lake, for enjoying it in as many forms, and you teamed up with a powerful team of lawyers from the University of Chicago. Is that where it's from?
Right.
Okay.
So the way the law clinic works is it's part of their teaching curriculum.
Oh, that's so
So
cool.
they just have this fresh supply of students who are real eager beavers.
Dude, that's
And
great.
they're ready to roll up their sleeves and go.
Yeah, they're hungry to get their teeth into
They're-
something like that.
And they haven't
make
already-
make a name.
And they haven't started a career and made their contacts where they're worried about ruining a relationship
Right.
yet. They're willing to do what's right and not what's
Idealistic.
Yeah, I mean, that's really cool.
But
Because
it must be quite scary to go up against, it's like, these major companies, I imagine, have pretty
deep pockets.
deep pockets and hefty, lawyers.
Yeah, especially when they have friends behind closed doors at the EPA.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I can only
Of
imagine.
course.
That's a bit of an unholy alliance there.
You haven't.
Was it helpful that you kind of caught them with their pants down, and there was a mea culpa by them? Did that help a little bit?
Yeah, that's one of the issues that's like off the table. They've already been found guilty.
They already paid $2,000 for that.
Yeah. So
Wait, but hold on. Is it possible that perhaps that might not have even had been detected if you had not started doing some investigation to see what was really going on down there?
that's a good question. I'm not sure because in this case, they had to self-report the issue for reasons that I don't quite understand. They're supposed to be reporting everything that goes on with their facility, and
Sure. So perhaps that might be a situation. Well, I don't want to.
Oh, by the way, we just poisoned half of the lake.
Yeah. Well, you know what? And let's go ahead and report this one, but not report these other ones. Like, I don't want to say something that's gonna, I'm not trying to create.
Yeah, because it'll be U.S. Steel that's running Witches Rock Surf Camp. If you're not careful.
Exactly. Have you had any fish wrapped up in newspaper in the mailbox, or any heavy breathing phone calls late at night? I mean, what's going on?
luckily, no.
That's good. That's good. No, I mean, it takes a lot of balls, man, to go and stand up against a giant company that's been doing business for over 100 years, that's embedded with the U.S. government, and as just, I mean, it's like the bigger and older these organizations are, the harder they are to change, right? You see it across the board. So probably talking about these manufacturing companies that really, in order to do it right, shouldn't be discharging anything and should be treating everything that they produce, all the byproducts, and then disposing of it in a proper way, turning it into irrigation water, like filtering out absolutely everything, not allowing 1 milliliter per whatever of chromium, hexavalent chromium, which I looked it up, man. That shit's gnarly. That's that causes cancer, and it's prevalent. It's prevalent in the lake, and you've got, like you said, 20% of the Earth's drinking water. And you've got these companies, these for-profit companies, that are skirting some of these laws, or even they don't even care because it really doesn't even cut into what they're making. So it's a scary situation when you think about it. It takes a lot of guts to try and make a change, So I totally commend you there.
Yeah. So this event happened 2.5 years ago, and since then we've seen just a steady drumbeat of more violations, as if they feel a little more emboldened. And we're focused on this one event, but there are other events that we could be focused on if we had the manpower and the resources. But we're spread thin right now, so we just got to take care of what we can.
It's so the question I have is, after they were found to have done what they did, what did they do to rectify it? How did they help to try to clean it up? Was there anything like that happened?
There was an initial penalty put on them by the government monetary, and then what I would call a promise to do better. And it was very vague, very nonspecific. You would characterize it as a slap on the wrist, basically. Yeah, we'll do better. We'll try to do better.
No.
That was about it. Whereas we've come in with a very, very detailed kind of bullet point list of things they can do specifically to clean up their operation in terms of how they upkeep their equipment, how they train their workforce, how they run their facilities, all these things that are very specific. And we hired a scientist to study their operation and come up with this list. So, we're trying to hold their feet to the fire. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, so you guys aren't actually trying to tell them to like stop your industry, no more anything. You're just trying to get them to clean up their act and help them to like realize that it's possible for you to do this. It may cut into your margin, but
right
for the good of the lake and the good of the bloody planet, it is possible, and they just choose not to do it.
Right. We think they can run a clean operation.
Yeah, hey, Pat, to get back to what you were asking, like how would you even rectify when you spill some lethal carcinogen into the Great Lakes?
I don't know. Maybe you can help us answer that. But the fact of the matter is that I think that once it's there, it's really, really difficult to get rid of it. And I don't know if the filtering system that is used for the drinking water, which a lot of people drink that water, is adequate. It probably brings it down to the parts per millions that you can tolerate, but who really knows that you can tolerate that? It's just we have a big brain. Humans have a big brain, and they can think their way through anything. And there's no doubt in my mind that this can be worked out. So they're not killing us, because they're killing themselves too by polluting the water like that. So, what would your comment be on that?
Yeah, they're counting on the phenomenon of dispersal. They're putting a little bit of stuff in the lake, and then it's going to disperse and be undetectable over time. But the thing is, they've been doing it for decades and decades.
And they're not the only
It's
company.
accumulating.
It's bull crap.
They're not the only
Because
company doing it. You're going after this one company at the same time, and you're investing all this energy into their processes when right next door there's another factory that's probably doing the exact same thing and is happy that there isn't so much of a spotlight on them.
That kind of attitude is how extinction begins of a species. You have all kinds of things in that lake that rely on the clean water. And then when you put pollution in, one begets the other as far as pollution. You hurt the birds, you hurt the fish, you hurt the soil, you hurt the grasslands, you hurt all of that stuff. And you're drinking it yourself.
Like Mitch said, I think it's the cost of business. You know what I mean? It's one of their byproducts of what they do, and they don't really seem to give a shit.
They don't look for the big picture, which is they have kids too that have to live on the planet.
Well, what do we always say? You can vote with your wallet, right? It's going to take literally awareness of these issues. I think by doing something like this podcast, Mitch, and I've seen some of your other interviews where you've discussed this topic, I think that is, at least in my mind, a great avenue towards spreading the awareness, because with that awareness, hopefully you can create some positive change. Just more people knowing about this situation, knowing that companies like U.S. Steel are polluting the drinking water of millions of Americans. That's heavy. People, people need to hear that connection. And maybe someone's listening to the podcast that, has a big stake in U.S. Steel. Maybe maybe this podcast will help. I don't know.
You might have guys in black suits with sunglasses show up here and go, "You talking bad about me?"
Yeah, the shareholders can put pressure on them,
right? I mean,
if they're motivated.
I feel exactly right, and I'm just, at least I get excited thinking about. I see my kids and the environmental outlook they have, and what they're talking about with their friends, and what's being discussed at school. It's so much different than what I experienced in school. They already know there's this huge issue. They're already helping to, they're young. They're culturally, they haven't been set in their ways. When you deal with these old companies, these old executives that are just used to making money in their own ways, it's that's the hardest part. You got to create that awareness, and hopefully that leads to people like Pat, like you were saying, they've got kids and grandkids.
Yes, it begins to show some change. So one of my questions is that you undertook this project and you continue to undertake these projects in Chicago area, and some of it is volunteer, but how are you raising your funds for some of the studies that you have to actually pay for?
We've been, the Chicago chapter has been pretty successful raising money. We get involved in events that provide us a little bit of a windfall, and then we take that money and funnel it toward the legal case. Now, we are receiving gratis lawyer support from the university.
That's great.
Because this is
smart.
the kind of thing they sink their teeth into.
So smart. I mean,
they love it.
It's the recipe of how to become an activist and move things forward. Of course, I always.
And so there's a national chapter of the Surfrider Foundation. And do they help you too?
No, we're on our own there. But they have lawyers, and those folks have been sort of sitting in on all the discussions. So they realize that it enhances their image as a organization to have what's going on in Chicago reflect well, and
So
it's potentially one of the Surfrider's biggest legal involvements.
I think that you guys pioneered this whole thing, and it's a great example to other Surfrider chapters to not sit idle and let bad things happen, and to be proactive.
Yeah.
And so you have a roadmap to successfully fighting big companies, and you can't ever let up, I guess.
Right. There's no end to this, unfortunately.
And how do you find the time to do this? It seems like almost a full-time job.
Well, at a certain point in my life, my kids were old enough that they didn't need me every day, every minute. And I had moved from being on staff in the advertising world to being self-employed. So there was a little more flexibility in my schedule. And it just seemed like I was at that point where I could do this. So it was timing. And then, as I like to say, in this case, it was just me being curious, willing to, get involved, follow from point A to point B to point C, and just being open to what could happen. And I will say that this action it's really hard to replicate. Being hooked up with free lawyers is that's not common.
It's genius is what it is.
But it was born of my willingness to get involved and try to help my surfing community on the south end of the lake and figure out why some of them were sick. I mean, really sick. And then, one thing followed the other, and it was all because I was, willing to take it to the next level.
Yeah. Well,
and I didn't go into this thinking that this was going to happen. This is you can't imagine that this is going to happen, but it did. So,
well, I'm sure there's probably people that would love to get involved and just don't even know where to begin. And so it's interesting to hear your story, and it's going to go on beyond this particular lawsuit. Not to focus on all the bad things that are going on around the Great Lakes and the water with Surfrider, but I think it's important to know what other issues are you guys facing where you're at. What's the future look like? What other issues are going to have to be addressed?
Well, I'll tell you right now, you may be aware of this, but the water levels are rising so rapidly, it's frightening.
Yeah, I mean, we were just there 3-4 months ago,
Yeah.
and there were flooded streets and sandbags, and we'd heard that the water had receded, but that there were basements filled. And
yeah, the winter storms really bring kind of apocalyptic conditions, and they're going through that right now. We have shoreline homeowners are watching their houses sit on the edge of a precipice of sand, vertical wall, and I don't know where it's all going.
so is this glacier melt? Is this rising sea levels? What's going on?
Well, if you study the science of climate change, they talk about how the jet streams are being disrupted by these temperature changes.
What, are you talking CNN or Fox? Because I think I've seen like two very different perspectives on this. Okay.
I only know one.
Okay. Well, the point is that there's studies that say that there's a cycle to the Great Lakes water table rising and falling, correct?
Right. Since they started studying the water levels in the Great Lakes, they've detected kind of a 40-year cycle of high and low.
Okay.
And we've seen that in my lifetime where it's gone up and gone down. But right now it's spiking up.
Never as high as it's been. Is it
yeah,
ever been this high
we're
before?
at an all-time high now.
Okay.
And they have just a few days ago put in motion declaring the Michigan shoreline a disaster area.
Wow.
And freeing up the funds to address everything that goes with that. So it's bad.
I'm not a scientist, but I see all these glaciers melting, and from being on the beach with Witch's Rock, a few years ago we had the estuary drift, and I was really worried because it came incredibly close to the business. I thought we might lose part of the business. And I was telling my kids, look, this business isn't always going to be here. The ocean levels are rising, and they forecast, 50 years from now, Florida is going to be a third underwater or blah, blah, blah. You got areas that are investing in these expensive seawall systems, the Netherlands, I think. It seems like it's not really a matter of if or when. So I don't think the argument is whether or not that's happening. I think it is happening, and it's probably only a matter of time, right?
Right.
It's an unfortunate thing, and perhaps this is a cycle, and it will recede. But I think over time, aren't we all on the coast doomed? I'm living my life that way.
I'm not a scientist, but I play one on TV. And when I play it on TV, it tells me that global warming has an awful lot to do with it. So you're saying that there's these 40-year cycles where it's low and then it's high, but this is high on steroids.
Right.
And everyone knows that the sea levels are rising. Everyone knows that
it depends.
the polar ice caps are melting, so it doesn't take a scientist.
People argue that the glaciers always melt every 100,000 years or something. I don't know, but
well, that's what a capitalist says.
I know,
and I like to make money just like the rest of them. However, a capitalist will tell you what they want you to know and hear, so they can continue to make money and never think about the future.
It's very true.
So send those guys with the black hats and the sunglasses down to talk to me.
Well, it all comes back to voting with your wallet and really supporting the companies that are doing it right and not supporting the companies that are doing it wrong. I feel like that capitalism is the method towards creating these sorts of changes. I feel like if you can control that, or if you can influence that, you've got a much greater path towards success, because money talks.
What I want to say is that all you people out there that are part of the Surfrider Foundation, take an example from what you're telling us today about how you work in partnership with think tanks, which are universities, with fresh students that have legal background, engineering background, and work with them to help solve your problems in whatever area you're at. What you have is a template for success. Of course, there's always going to be problems with that. However, it's little ripples make big waves, and that's what you're doing right now.
Right. If you want to get involved, follow your passion.
Yeah.
Figure out what you love. Find people who share that passion, and there could be an organization that's already out there for you. There's probably a Tamarindo environmental organization if you love Tamarindo. For me, it was with my surfing background, hooking up with Surfrider, and then everything that follows that.
Very well put.
And then maybe good things could happen.
Yeah, multiple good things. I wish you the best of luck in this whole ordeal with this lawsuit. I'm sure it's going to dig into your free time. How much longer are you going to be in Tamarindo? Are we going to catch some waves together, or what?
I would like that.
Yeah.
I'm here till Thursday.
All right.
So.
Yeah. Well,
I feel like I know Witch's Rock. I'm ready to find a secret spot.
Hey, what airline you flying out on?
Southwest.
Oh, okay. I'm flying Thursday also. It'd be funny if we're on the same plane. We got United, though.
I'll share a shuttle with you.
Yeah, okay. All right. We'll leave super early. We'll catch some waves on the way.
How can people get more information on what your chapter is doing? How can anyone show some even just moral support or even help you guys out even further?
So surfrider.org is kind of where you start. And then you can drill down and find the Chicago chapter and our website, and you can donate if you want to help us out. That's always a good way, because we're paying for stuff left and right, and that's a great way to help. And you can sign up to be a volunteer if you have a chapter that's close to you, and you can buy Surfrider merchandise. There's all sorts of swag out there. That helps them too. And just get involved.
Hey, Mitch, thanks so much for being on the podcast, man. Really, been great to have you.
It's been a real pleasure.
Pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thanks for listening to the Get Out and Surf podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Witches Rock Surf Camp, located beachfront in Tamarindo, Costa Rica. If you haven't done so already, make sure to subscribe to the show. You can do that on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, etc. And if you like the show, give us a review on iTunes. That would be great. That's it. We'll see you next week, same place, same time, with another episode of Get Out and Surf. Pura vida y nos vemos.